Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. From space defense to deep space agriculture, the European Space Day in Gdańsk, Poland, are spotlighting the strategic, science, and industrial future of space exploration under the Polish EU presidency. And as Europe's ambitions grow across security, innovation, and planetary survival, so does Poland's role, symbolized by its first space mission in decades. Joining us today on TVP World to explore the European and Polish space industry, as well as the groundbreaking mission of Poland's astronaut, is Alex Cadier, correspondent at TVP World, who's also acting as a moderator at the EU Space Days event. Hello and welcome to TVP World. So Alex, I saw the event yesterday. It's a really cool event. Great moderation, by the way, really appreciated. And is it safe to finally say Poland can into space?
Well, Poland is certainly a big emerging player. That was the theme we heard from the Polish Space Agency, Polsa. They were here as a part, of course, of the hosting by the Polish presidency of the European Union. So that was a real sign as Poland as an emerging player. Now, of course, in the European Union, you have countries that have been have a presence in space for decades. You think of Germany, you think of France, certainly the Italians also have a really big presence in this field. But very much in parallel with what we've seen from the Polish government, from the Polish economy, there is a rise, a surge of the Polish space industry as well. As you said, the Eagle Eye, that largest ever Polish satellite, was launched last year. We know that Poland is also launching military observation satellites, and we've heard that from Polish officials here. They really want Poland to have a growing role in this industry. But they are a relatively new player. They joined the European Space Agency only back in 2012. But ever since, the investments from Poland into the European Space Agency have increased and increased. Well, it's also clear to say there's a real appetite from Polish officials we've seen to talk about more cooperation with other European powers. That was a really big theme of this conference, that there has to be European cooperation, there has to be European autonomy. Poland and those better established players play a really big part in that.
All right, now I want to talk a little bit more about this EU Space Day event and how does that reflect the shift in Europe's strategic posture when it comes to space, both economically and in the defense frontier?
Well, I want to give you a little bit of an insight, a snippet, a little nugget from a conversation that we heard yesterday. There was a gentleman who was from the German Ministry of Defense, Michael Kniepen. He was talking about that strategic decision-making for the European Union, and he described it as follows. Russia is an endangerer in space. China is a serious competitor and contender in space. And the US, as he put it, is an erratic partner, but still a partner. So you have a threat from Russia, you have incredibly powerful competition from China on the other side, and the United States, which is being seen by so many people here as a much less reliable partner than it would have been a few years ago. So that is certainly, you can imagine with all those factors, a really big concern for the European space program, for the European space industry, and that was really embodied in this EU Space Days. We heard that last year in Budapest as well. Of course, there was a focus on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but there's a really big focus on strategic autonomy, on the European Union being able to have its own capabilities, its own ability. And we have services already. We have Copernicus, which is Earth observation, Earth imaging, which is incredibly important and reliable. And we heard some use cases for that, which were really interesting. For example, if you're an agricultural wholesaler and you want to buy a lot of wheat or a lot of barley, well, you can use free-to-use public imaging from Copernicus satellites to see what fields are growing what in the world. And so there's a focus on autonomy, but not necessarily on isolation. Europe obviously wants to build its capabilities to be a stronger player on the global scene when it comes to space, but also wants to really foster that cooperation between the European institutions, the Commission, the European Space Agency and others, as well as those member states like Poland, like France, like Germany, to build that European space powerhouse.
All right, like you mentioned, there's a lot of cooperation between the countries as well. How is Poland leveraging its EU presidency to raise its profile in the European space ecosystem?
I mean, very simply, look around me. This is a big part of Poland leveraging its presidency to bring these important stakeholders together. Really key figures in the space industry are here, really key figures in new space legislation. There is a proposal from the European Commission on the way for an overarching set of laws and rules to avoid what they call fragmentation. So you have one country which does things one way, another country does things another way. There's a legal framework here, a legal framework there. That makes things a lot more complicated for companies to operate because they don't know exactly which rules to respect at any given time. So there's a real push from those institutions, which I said a lot of the leadership are here, to coordinate better across Europe. And of course, that Polish presidency is crucial to that. They are hosting all these key players, bringing them together. We heard from Rafał Borek yesterday, who is from the Polish Space Agency. We heard from Dr. Marta Wachowicz, who is the president of the Polish Space Agency, really talking about that cooperation between Poland and others. And of course, this incredible setting, which you would have seen in our reports on TVP World, really shows that there's a desire from Poland to be a bigger presence, to work with its partners, and to grow the European industry as a whole.
And what benefits do you think Poland will be able to get from these partnership with this European space industry and its partners?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ben, because actually, you know, a lot of this feels very theoretical. We've had policy debates and we've had debates about European legislation for space, and a lot of it can feel a little technical, and it's really important for our viewers to understand that there are real, everyday, practical things that we benefit. So on one hand, I want to talk about the things that Poland already benefits from. You have Galileo, which is the European Union's satellite-based navigation. You have Copernicus, that I just mentioned, that satellite imagery, which is really vital both for defense preparedness, for crisis management if there's flooding or if there's a big, then it really helps governments respond to those things. But there's a couple things coming down the pipeline. Iris Squared is really this new flagship program. Now, I will give you a comparison. It's a bit like Starlink, but it's not exactly like Starlink. So to give you an example, what it does, satellites that will be launched will then provide connectivity, provide internet services on the ground. Now, it's not going to be for our everyday users. You won't be able to get an Iris terminal just for your house, but it will be mostly or primarily for government services. So those crisis response moments. If, for example, the mobile phone networks go down or your internet goes down and you have fire responders or police officers, they will still be able to have connectivity. And the key behind Iris, of course, is that it will be a European system for European governments. What's particularly interesting about Iris as well is that it is a public-private partnership. So you have private companies investing in this system. Private companies will be able to benefit from this system, but it will offer Europe secure connectivity in remote areas like the Arctic, but secure connectivity for crisis management, for emergency services, for the military, crucially. We heard from Rafał Borek from the Polish Space Agency saying that one of the potentials could be for, in a war scenario that, of course, we all want to avoid, drones to be connected using those satellites. So really the potential for really modern European defense. That won't be, of course, directly affecting users themselves. You won't be able to have it on your phone, but it does mean that European governments will be far more connected and, crucially, with a European system.
Great, brilliant. Well, you mentioned the public-private partnership a bit earlier, and I want to explore that a little bit as well, because we have seen a very booming private space race, especially taking place in the United States, Starlink, like you mentioned. Do you think Europe is ready to compete in this space, or is it positioning itself more as a strategic partner instead?
Well, that's a really interesting question. We heard on one of the panels yesterday, we heard about competitiveness. Oh, Europe needs to be more competitive. And it's clear, there's no bones about this, Europe is behind on some elements of the space industry, particularly when you look at the United States, China, and to a certain extent, Russia. That is a concern, certainly here. But one panelist said we can talk about competitiveness, but why don't we talk about European dominance? Why don't we push our ambition even further? Because the interesting conversation was, well, should the EU start focusing on just European projects and focusing on European partnerships, or should we try and build more external relationships, as Ben, you were just suggesting? And certainly one of the responses, well, why don't we do both? But one important factor for the European space industry, for the European Union, to become an attractive partner for others, the United States, China, or other closer nations, is to be much more powerful, is to do things much better, is to grow that space industry, not just to be a partner out of goodwill, just because the United States wants to be nice to Europe. That seems less and less likely. But because there's a trade-off, because there's a mutual benefit. If you have systems like Galileo, like Copernicus, those strong flagship European programs, or innovative, brilliant startups like we see in Poland, like we see across the European Union, then that makes us a very attractive player and therefore a good partner for other global powers in space. There is still a long way to go. Behind the scenes here, people have said, look, we really do need to do more. We really do need to build up both the infrastructure, the investment, also the staffing. One of the crucial challenges when it comes to private businesses in Europe, and we've heard that time and again here, is that we're very, very, very good at startups. But when it gets to becoming a much, much bigger company, the kinds of Starlink or SpaceX-sized companies, that becomes a bit of a challenge, and those companies so often need to go look for investment in the United States and elsewhere. So that's certainly an area for improvement in Europe.
Right. And also, let's talk a little bit about the practical stuff as well, because we do know that the Polish astronaut currently is conducting some experiment. What can we expect from these experiments taking place in the outer space?
Well, certainly those experiments are designed to look at DNA, to look at the impact of being in space and space radiation on human DNA. And what's really interesting is how that works. To my limited understanding, I'm not a space expert, but I am surrounded by them, is that they bring yeast to the International Space Station, to space, and they look at the cellular effect, the cellular reaction of yeast to space radiation, and that also gives us information on how human DNA might be impacted, because, of course, astronauts really there's some serious health challenges once you are in space for an extended period of time. Now, our viewers might be going, great, we'll bring them back to Earth and they'll be fine. It's a bit more complicated than that, particularly if we have ambitions to go to Mars, because there has to be a way to make sure the health of the astronauts is sustained throughout the trip. And of course, if they're going to be going away for weeks on end, that health has to be sustained. So these are the kind of experiments that are going behind the scene. I think it really shows us how complex space exploration is, how complex it's very much a game of not even 3D chess, it's 5D chess, because of course you have the engineering side, you have the satellites, you have the rockets, you have the launchers, you have the ISS up in space, which we all know. But just to get humans there for an extended period of time, to make sure they have everything they need to sustain themselves, to do these experiments, takes a whole different world of research. And again, this is where there's an opportunity for European startups and space companies to really make an impact by growing on that research base. And we've seen that there has been a shift. There's certainly space is more of a priority for Europe than it used to be. But as I said, still quite a long road ahead.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Alex. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on World Talks.
My pleasure.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.